Welcome to the 8th episode of the Four Winds on Wednesday series, brought to you by your Los Angeles Symphonic Winds. And today we're going to be talking about the world of retail music and Zoom recordings. Actually, Zoom recording is not quite the right word because Zoom has to do more with interviews and people on the screen and all that stuff. And it's not usually the best way to do recordings of things. We're talking about virtual recordings. But we're not going to be just talking about virtual recordings. We're also going to be taking a look at live recordings in this pandemic era. But before we get to that, I want to share with you some really special news. The Los Angeles Symphonic Winds sent out, as many of you know, a survey in which we asked our subscribers for some input about upcoming concerts. And we also have been working with the Skirball Center to try to arrange a concert with them. And what we've come up with is, and I want you to save this date. The date is July the 18th, and it's going to be a performance by the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds at the beautiful Skirball Center, which many of you have been to. Many of you know it's right off the 405 freeway. It's just a magnificent setting. And we're going to be doing two concerts on that day, one starting around 4 o'clock and the other starting around 6 o'clock. Now, we're going to be limiting the audience to about 150 for all sorts of safety reasons and what the Skirball is asking us to do. So as we get closer to that date, we're going to be selling tickets. And I want you, if you haven't already been a member of our mailing list, to make sure you go to our website and make sure we have your mailing address, because we're going to be sending out information about this wonderful concert, Summer Sounds at the Skirball, and that's July the 17th. It should be great fun. In addition, in August, on the 22nd of August, we'll be having a much more intimate concert setting featuring the members of the LA Winds and our 584 Jazz Band with a wonderful home concert at the house of Julie Newman, our resident real estate agent and also member of the board of directors. She has a lovely home, and we're going to have a concert that's going to include 50 people. We're calling it Julie and Steve's Summer Soiree, and that's going to be on August 22nd. So save those two dates, July 18 and August 22, and you'll be getting some more information if you're on our mailing list about those two great events. And now, before we meet the people who are going to be talking to us today about the retail world and also about the virtual recordings, we're going to hear two terrific performers. Paula Savastano, who you met earlier in this series when she was talking about royalties and things like that. And also, we're going to be hearing from Noah Gordon, who's a terrific saxophone player, and he's going to be doing an excerpt from a piece by John Williams, some of the music that was used in Catch Me If You Can, that great motion picture. Before we do that, though, I want to play for you something that will set the mood for the next Four Winds on Wednesday broadcast, which will be in 2 weeks. And we're calling that one Prelude to Cinco de Mayo, because it will be exactly 1 week before Cinco de Mayo, that Wednesday. And to sort of set the mood for that, I want you to listen to a recording the LA Winds made a couple of years ago of an excerpt from the ritual dance from a piece called El Amor Brujo, which means love the magician. And it'll set the mood for what's coming up. So Paul, if you can run this, that would be just great. Isn't that an exciting piece? It really sets the stage for what's going to come up in a couple of weeks when we have the Cinco de Mayo special Four Winds on Wednesday. And during that show, you're going to hear some recent recordings that Mike Armstrong is putting together that the LA Winds have just made of a great Mexican march called Zacatecas, and also the great piece by H. Owen Reed entitled La Fiesta Mexicana. So that'll be quite an event. That's 2 weeks from today. But now I want to take the time to introduce you to, actually reintroduce you to somebody who we met a month or so ago when she was talking about royalties and licenses and all that stuff. But now she's going to talk a little bit more about her flute playing. So would you please join me in welcoming Paula Savastano?
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Paula.
Good to see you.
Thank you for coming back and joining us. Now, a couple of months ago, as we talked about, we did learn about your involvement in the company has to do with licensing and royalties and all that stuff. But what I'm curious about is how you got started in your own right as a performer. What did you do initially, or what attracted you to the flute?
Okay, so at age 3, I had this unique interest in watching Evening at the Pops on a local Boston PBS station. And at one point, I pointed to Lois Schaefer, the piccoloist from the Pops, and said, I want to play that. And my path was pretty much set. At 11, when it was time to pick an instrument, I insisted on the flute, much to my parents' demise, because being the youngest of 6 kids, they wanted me to take up an instrument that they already owned, which included the clarinet, the trumpet, or the trombone. I fought. They refused to let me take the flute the first year. I relented, and they gave in finally. And I started, when I was 12, I started playing flute, and I haven't looked back.
Excellent. Now, I'm curious, we have kind of an interesting Florida hook in today's program. My son, Paul, who's doing the technical directing for this show, attended the University of Miami. And our guest that's coming up in a little while, Andrew Robinson, went to the University of Florida. But you too went to the University of Miami, didn't you?
Yes.
And how involved were you in music at that particular time?
So I did my undergrad at the Boston Conservatory studying flute performance. I got my bachelor's degree there. And in my senior year, I suffered a pretty devastating arm injury and dealt with subsequent tendonitis, which led me to realize that I might need something to fall back on. So I looked for schools in music business and found the University of Miami, which has a music business and entertainment industry program among the top in the country. Under the tutelage, subsequently, of Alfred Reed, who is a very well-renowned band composer.
Excellent.
Yeah,
and so you pursued your flute playing there.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm curious though, the piece that you've selected, I find it a very fascinating piece. We didn't have time to include the whole thing, but could you tell us a little bit about this piece and why you chose it for this live stream today?
Okay, the piece is called Earth by Takasugu Muramatsu. I was introduced to the piece when the Song of Angels Flute Orchestra performed it with David Shostak playing the solo.
Wow.
I immediately fell in love with the piece and decided that I was going to learn it. So I learned it, and I chose it specifically because Earth Day is on April 22nd, the song being Earth. The piano part on this piece mimics flowing water, and the flute part sings over the top, sort of like floating on a breeze.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's have a listen to this. I'm looking forward to sharing it with our audience today. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just would like to thank my composer, Marianne Stickler, who is a sister at our local chapter of Sigma Alpha Iota. And I would also like to thank First United Methodist Church of Redondo Beach and Reverend Erica Gara for allowing us to use the church to record and also providing the recording for us. And I'd like to dedicate the performance to my best friend, Gina, another LA Wind flautist who passed away a month ago from gastric cancer. And we actually met in the flute section at LA Winds. And me, her, and our other friend, Leanne Freeman, another flautist from Winds, became instant friends and were inseparable. Our colleagues in the band considered us the Three Musketeers, and we'll miss Gina desperately.
Excellent. Well, this will be a lovely tribute to her memory. Isn't that just beautiful? Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Paula. Just beautiful performing and a fitting tribute to a lovely woman, Gina. Okay, now I'd like to bring on two of our interview guests. First, we'll meet Andrew Robinson, and then we'll talk with Mike Armstrong. So if we can have Andrew and Mike join us, that would be just great. There's Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, and Mike.
Hi. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for joining us, Mike. If I can start with you. Just now, many of our longtime subscribers know. Yes. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I'm with you. Many of our longtime subscribers, Mike, know that the Armstrong family has contributed mightily to the success of the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds. How has being part of that musical family influenced the direction your musical life has gone in?
Oh, man. Well, it seems like my family's been involved with LA Winds for so long, I can hardly remember when we first started, because we've done so many great concerts and we've gone on some tours, of course, international tours, and just a lot of great times. And how many years has it been since I first joined? I want to say it's about 17 years or so, maybe 18. I think my mom was the first person to join the band, and she invited me to come play. I may have been the second one. And then eventually my dad came and my middle brother, Sam, on trombone. So we were all brass players. And I have to say, playing with the Winds was, I think, a big part of all of our musical lives for a long time. And definitely a very great place to learn and practice. And so many great opportunities came from that, especially the touring. I think we all have really special memories of going to Europe and to China and all those great trips. So it's a big thing for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, now, Andrew, if I may turn to you for a minute, you have roots in Florida as well. And
yes, I do.
Kind of an interesting story because it takes you from Toronto to Kentucky to
correction, Memphis, Tennessee. But it's
pardon me, Memphis, Tennessee. But when you were at the University of Florida, you were also involved in the music program as well. I know you were. That wasn't your major, though, was it?
No, it's a very unlikely story. So I went there as an English major, wanting to be a lawyer. But I always had University of Florida in mind also for the clarinet because I knew about Professor Estrin. But when I was in the marching band initially, the first rehearsal, they said they needed more players for symphonic band. So I said, okay, I'm going to audition. I would love to do concert playing. And when Mitchell Estrin heard me, I played variations of a Korean folk song. And he said, I hear something in you, and would you like to join the studio? And of course, I was blown away. And it kind of just changed the trajectory of my whole life. It went from clarinet just being kind of a hobby to like, wow, like one of the clarinet greats asked me to join his studio without me even being a major. So.
Excellent. Well, now, when you were at the University of Florida, you did, of course, participate in the marching band. And I think we have an excerpt from that would be fun to see if we can bring it at that point.
Yes, some fond memories.
Okay.
We welcome you back to Glendale, Arizona for the blockbuster Total Access halftime show. And what a first half for the #2 SEC champion Florida Gators. A 34-14 lead over unbeaten and #1 Ohio State. We now listen in on the pride of the sunshine, the Florida Marching Band, under the direction of John Watkins. Listen and enjoy.
Well, Andrew, that was just great. We'll come back. We'll come back to Andrew in just a moment. But I want to ask Mike a couple of things, if I could. Now, we all know, Mike, about your trumpet playing and your piano playing and your conducting of the LA Winds. And although you may not like to admit it, your work as a librarian with the LA Winds.
Yeah.
But in more recent years, you've gotten involved in some more technology-related things. Virtual recordings, and also some other types of live recordings. Can you tell us what sparked your interest in that?
Well, I didn't really get into the video stuff until last year, right about the time that we had the lockdown. I remember it was in March when we were going to have a concert that I was actually going to be conducting on. I think that was supposed to be on March 15th or somewhere around there. And that got canceled, and it was a big deal, and everybody's going, oh, man, all these performances are canceled. And all of a sudden, we all had a little bit of time on our hands because we were stuck in our houses, and there wasn't anywhere to go, really. So I got interested in learning a little bit more about editing video because I have worked with audio and editing, music and doing that kind of thing. But I had never had much time to get into the video editing. So I started experimenting with making some, animated logos and making some fun little projects. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And I spent many hours just sitting here practicing and learning and not thinking that I would really have anything much to do with it for a long time, until I noticed that there were actually some opportunities because of what was going on in the world. People were wanting to make music and wanting to perform, showing their music and also performing with other people somehow virtually, right? I saw that going on, and it kind of sparked an idea that maybe I could figure out how to get into that, especially with my musical background, and work with some of these musicians to help them create the content that they wanted to get out there. So that's how that all started.
Now, you not only did it in a more technology virtual way, but also you also been involved in recording things that are done live, yet in pandemic times. And if you want to set this up, we're going to take a little look at the thing you did with the American Youth Symphony.
Yeah. So the virtual stuff came first. I was working on that for a while, working with some schools and different people. And later on, when a couple of orchestras and bands started to be able to perform some concerts for recording, I think it was in the fall of 2020, certain organizations, if they had the space and the right instrumentation, spacing people out on a stage. The project that I'm going to show you a little bit of was recorded at Royce Hall, UCLA, with the American Youth Symphony. And my role with this was to come in and work with the camera crew. They had a professional camera crew. These are Hollywood-type people who have worked on major shows and films. And they had great cameras. I think we had 7, 8 cameras, cranes, and all of that great stuff. But they realized there was one issue, is that the conductor was giving notes to these guys from the score and saying, well, at this point we need to show this instrument and that instrument. And they realized that they needed someone, what they call it is a score reader, that can work with the camera crew, because not every cameraman that you find is going to know all of the orchestral instruments off the top of their head. So that started by I used to play in the American Youth Symphony. They called me up and asked if I would be a score reader. So I went down. We had a recording day. So we all had headsets, walkie-talkies, and I made notes in my score according to what the conductor wanted. And as they performed the piece, or the different pieces that they did, I would talk to the camera people and say, okay, B camera, get ready for, cello solos coming up. First violin, whatever was going on in the music. Pretty tricky to plan that out because you have to think of the timing for them to move things. But we figured it out, and then I ended up talking to the guys, and they ended up hiring me to be involved in the editing process as well, because I told them I had been working on that and had some experience with it. So I also went into the post-production side of it.
Now, what we're going to see, so you were involved at the live recording as well as the post-production of what we're going to see? Well, that's great. Can we take a look at, what's the piece, Mike? Just, do you remember?
This was from that Britain variations on, what is the theme? Of Freight Bridge?
Yes, that's it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back and talk about the virtual kind of recording that you did for the LA Winds. Let's take a look at this. Well, that was just great, Mike. Let's take a look, though, at what you've done with the LA Winds, and then after we're done looking at that, you can explain a little bit about the virtual recording process, if you would. But let's take a look at what you did back in December, which I thought was just a great, great job. And we're so much looking forward to what you're going to do for us in 2 weeks. Let's take a look at this. That's great, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can't wait to see what you do with the Zacatecas and the La Fiesta Mexicana coming up. But now we're going to try something interesting. We're going to have a screen share going on where Mike talks about, for a few minutes, about the process of putting these kinds of things together. So Mike, take it from here.
All right. So I got my screen share rolling up here. Let's see if we can see it. There we go. So what this is here is the program that I use for editing audio. We call these programs DAW, D-A-W, Digital Audio Workstation. And some common ones that you may have heard of are Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, and this one that I'm using is Ableton. And this is where most of the work happens for these virtual productions. But I'll give you a quick little rundown on how this whole process works.
That'd
Basically,
be
great, to get people to play all together when they're not actually together and they're recording from the safety of their own homes, we need to have them be synced up. So we make tracks that have a click to it, and using a couple different devices, people will listen to the click track and then they'll record themselves, record a video that gets video and sound from another device. So it's a little bit of work for the people who are recording. Even technically, they have to get all that stuff figured out. It's a little bit tricky, but we've got the hang of it at the LA Winds because we've done this a couple times. So that's people send in the files, and basically that all goes to me. I get all of these files together, organize them, rename them. A lot of them have to be converted to the right frame rate and format and all of that. And then it all gets dumped into this program here. And you can see these groups. We have flutes here, and then oboes, clarinets, low reeds, saxes, trumpets here, horns.
And Mike, let me interrupt. And you have control over how these instruments sound to a certain extent, don't you? You can change them a little bit. I don't know how many mistakes you can fix, but you can do something. Can you demonstrate, for example, what you might do with one of those instruments in terms of changing the sound?
Yeah, I can show you that. So the general philosophy that I have and that I've been told is the best thing is to do as little as possible. You certainly could go through here and manipulate every single note if you wanted to. You can move notes around in time or change their pitch or add effects to it. But the idea is to try and just give it a little tuck here and there where it most needs it. And this whole process is really a lot like conducting, which is kind of neat. When you conduct the band, you rehearse in person and you would balance things out and you tell people to play a little bit less or more here or point out rhythmic things, all of that work. It's very similar to working in this program, except I have all the people's performances freezed in time, and I can really go in and do surgery on whatever I might want to. So for example, the first thing I do, of course, is get everybody lined up starting at the same time. And then usually I check for rhythmic things. It's a lot harder for people to play in time, when they're not together in the same room. There's a certain communication that happens, the flexibility. But when you play with a click track, it's actually really tricky to play with a click track. So sometimes people will drift a little bit in time and I can nudge them back into place. And if you look at the bottom of the screen here, for example, if this person is playing, this is a flute. Let's see if you can hear that. If I don't like the rhythm or if something's too fast or it's if I want to change anything in time, these are different beats. I can grab things and anchor things and move them around. So if a rhythm is wrong, I can fix that. If it's the whole thing was, if it was coming in a little bit early like this before the beat, I could take things and move them back. And if you did that with everybody too much, that would take, you could spend years doing this. But usually just find anything that is that really sticks out in the mix that you would want to do that to. So you can do the rhythmic adjustment. You want to do some noise removal, usually in the space where people are not playing. Sometimes there'll be a hum of an air conditioner, or you might hear a dog barking somewhere. And of course, you go in and cut that out.
So you can take those things out as well. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So
yeah,
we're looking forward to seeing what you've done. Hopefully, you've got a good work product that the members of the band, I think 50 some odd band members sent you things for you to work with, and hopefully you didn't have to spend too much time fixing it. And then, of course, it's a question of coordinating it with the visuals as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. But you did a great job on the holiday one, and I can't wait to hear what you do with the one on the Cinco de Mayo concert.
It's gonna be great. You guys are gonna love it.
Thank you, Mike. Well, can we bring Andrew back in, because I have a question about technology for Andrew too. Andrew, you're back with us. That's great. So, when you told me about what you had done working at Sam Ash Music, I didn't realize you were also involved in some electronic things there as well. Could you take a minute and talk about what surprised you about working there? Oh, we're having a little difficulty with the sound, I see. Let's see if we can get Andrew back. All right. Well, that's all right. If we get him back at the end of the show, we'll bring him on. But he was talking about how many acoustic instruments are sold, but not only that, electronic clarinets, electronic pianos, electronic things that just add so much to the thing.
Andrew, are you hearing me clearly now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So what surprised me being in the brass, winds, and strings department was that they started these kind of like electronic saxophones and trumpets where you could I think they were called aerophones, but it was weird because you could touch a button and it could mimic any instrument. And it was popular not just in the beginners who had no skills. It was also a lot of gigged musicians were like, yeah, it kind of gets the crowd going when they hear something funky. And to me, I was kind of surprised because I felt like I was a purist. Like, oh, you got to play a clarinet, you got to play a string, you got to play, a trumpet. But a lot of people said, no, it doesn't really take away. It's an addition to the musical world, and that the effects you can do, or rather than having all these instruments, you can show that you have skill, but you can also touch a different mode and sound like a flute, and then the next second you sound like a trumpet. And that really shocked me how much they would sell. And from all ages, from a kid who was 5 years old, Dad, can you get me this, to a retired musician who was in their 80s. They sold a lot. Excellent.
That's interesting. All right. But now I want to take a couple of minutes to make sure we hear another acoustic instrument. But Mike and Andrew will be back at the end of the show. But now I want to move on because I want to hear and talk to Noah Gordon. So Noah, if you can join us, that would be just great.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you.
Hey, Noah, thanks for joining us today. Now, Noah, I know about your connections to Purdue University and what a great aeronautics program it has there. And I know you were also involved with the music program there. But first of all, what brought you to Purdue, and did you really do both things when you were there?
So one of the interesting things about Purdue that actually works out really well for the students there is that there isn't a music school. So you can't major in music at Purdue. But what result that ends up having is if you're interested in something else and you want to play in the bands, you're not necessarily competing with music majors. So the statistic when I was there was that 70% of the people in Purdue bands and orchestras were STEM majors. So these were people who everyone was there because they wanted to be there. They were working very hard to get their degrees in whatever technical field they were working on, but they made time in their schedule to participate in the bands and orchestras. And I think that's really cool.
I think so too. Now, what got you, we're going to hear your saxophone playing, but we're not going to go into too much detail on your aerodynamics and aeronautics thing. But what got you interested in that whole field of aeronautics and in engineering, if you will?
Sure. So I wouldn't say I was, one of those kids who was always dreaming of being an astronaut or anything. I liked Buzz Lightyear and everything, but in general, I was drawn to it later when I started engineering. I started engineering at Purdue as a first-year engineer without a specific major, as everyone does, and they try to expose you to the different fields. And one of the things that really drew my interest just in general is complex, interesting technical problems, but specifically was these interplanetary missions where they have to, they can't just send a satellite to Jupiter and just and go and get there, because you can't carry enough fuel to do that. It would be like hauling a gas tanker on a Vespa or something. It just wouldn't work. But one thing you can do is take advantage of the position of the planets and their positions relative to each other and their masses, and just send your satellite so it almost crashes into a planet, but just barely misses it and slingshots you straight to your next one. And they stack these missions so that you get 3, 4, 5 of these in a row. And they're planned decades ahead of time with 10, 15-year mission timelines where every rendezvous is perfectly planned out to adjust your trajectory to the next one. It's just winds up as these beautiful little things. You can see the planet spiraling around and the satellite going between all of them, and it's just mind-blowing that it even works, but it does. And
it does indeed. Now, let's talk about your saxophone playing. Actually, we're going to do more than just talk about your saxophone playing. The piece you picked was fascinating to me because it comes from a larger work that John Williams wrote and music extracted from a motion picture. Can you tell us a little bit about it and why you chose it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the movie that John Williams wrote this piece, Escapades, for is Catch Me If You Can, which was directed by Steven Spielberg, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. And DiCaprio plays this prodigious con man who, when he was a teenager, was posing as a doctor and a lawyer and a pilot, and eventually got into forging checks so he could steal from banks. And Tom Hanks plays the FBI agent who's chasing him. And there's a few different movements to this piece, and John Williams tries to get different vibes in each of them. One of them's like the sleuthing around of when he's doing these con jobs, and one of them's the wild flights of fantasy when he's, just doing crazy things for a teenager. And the excerpt that I've chosen is from the second movement called Reflections, which tries to give some insight into the relationships in his family and him reflecting on that. And what John Williams said is that he's trying to get a nostalgically tinged, impressionistic memoir of the progressive jazz movement. And I think it's successful. And the excerpt that I've chosen specifically, although the whole piece is designed to be accompanied by a full orchestra or a wind ensemble, I felt that the saxophone could stand on its own, which works well for this format where I'm recording by myself in my bedroom.
Well, you did just a great job. And we put some stills, how should I say, maybe more contemplative shots from that kind of action-packed motion picture. You just sound beautiful. Let's take a listen to that now and watch some of the stills that go along with it. Wow, Noah, really impressive. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, before I bring back everybody to say goodbye, I want to again remind you that 2 weeks from today, we have our big Cinco de Mayo special where Mike is going to present the Zoom recordings that have been made, especially for that live stream. And also to remind you to go to the website and make sure that we have your email address as we prepare for the big concerts that we're doing on July 18th at the Skirball Center, and then the Julie and Steve summer soiree on August 22nd. So let me bring back everybody to say goodbye, and thank you to all of you. There's Mike, thank you very much for your explanation. Andrew, thank you for talking about retail. Noah, thanks for talking about science and saxophone. And Paula, great flute playing. Thank you to all of you, and a big wave from everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for 4 Winds on Wednesdays.